Hey guys, honored to be here, and I'm honored to speak to Track, which is one of the most fascinating minds in the DAO space. The topic of this conversation is about culture and how culture is formed and how you get the right culture, which is a really interesting question that really extends beyond just DAOs. But for the purpose of this conversation, we're gonna take that question and we're gonna frame it within a few other questions to really make it like DAO specific and explore it within that context. To start off with, we'll do some intros so you guys know who we are. Then we'll kind of talk about why DAOs, which is a topic that I kind of stole from MetaDreamer. We'll talk about like what DAOs are, where we explore culture, vision, values, that sort of stuff. And then finally, we'll kind of close off with how DAOs, where we discuss like tooling and hopefully learn a little bit more about Coordinape. So to start off with a bit of a generic question, which we can add more resolution on later, why DAOs? Is there something tactical in that, or is there like an underlying philosophy we can access?
I mean, it's amazing to see all these people here all for that exact question, right? Why DAOs? I think there's something that kind of speaks to me and maybe all of us. Can you hear me okay with this mask on?
Try this one.
All right. What up? Don't Google me, okay? Please. There's something that speaks to my heart about DAOs, really. You know, there's something kind of inspiring, something about the future, something new. Well, what is it? Is it just like an LLC on the blockchain? Not really, right? Like, it's not fundamentally different than forms of coordination that have come before. There's been nations and religions and tribes and corporations have been the best, like, kind of highest technology we have for telling fictions that bind people's actions together into some usable product. But they suffer tremendous limitations, right? From top-down control systems that are really low bandwidth decision-making constructs to Baroque legal bullshit that is different in one place and another, all these hoops you have to jump through. And the promise of the DAO is that it's going to wipe a lot of that clean, you know, and allow a new start, you know, a place where there's open and equal access, where you don't have to worry about where you came from or who you are or what your skills are. You can jump in, you can start creating value, and you can start getting it back, getting rewarded. And there's so much to figure out, but I think that's really why we're all here, right? It is coordination all the way down. That's everything, right? And if we can figure out better ways to work together, better ways to trust each other, then that solves everything for us. So.
It's fascinating that you talk about DAOs as a bit of a blank slate to explore coordination. Out of curiosity, what exactly, like, how would you think about DAOs in like the arc of history? And why do you think it's important to start from this blank slate perspective?
Yeah, so it does follow this story for me, and it really, that story's locus is in the collective. So the space in between minds. And that space has always been there, right? The space of stories, the space of the imagination, of these collective fantasies, like we're in a team together, right? We consensually decide that. And that's a story as long as the human species. And so that story keeps getting told in new ways. And we're able to create artifacts in that space, right? Books and movies and memes. But these artifacts have always had pretty, not very robust infrastructure to hold them, right? Libraries get burned, memes change. What the blockchain has allowed for us to do is create this firmament within the collective. Really, what blockchain does is make concept real. And if that concept is scarcity, then you can create a value. You can create a dollar value for some object. Or if it's art, you know, you can trade it, but it stays there forever. And that solidity enables a whole new space of growth within this collective, within this intersubjective space.
Fascinating. Exploring certain implications of that. When it comes to Yearn, you guys did something really interesting recently. You guys really started off by publishing this blue book, which was kind of tying Yearn into like this meta story that we're talking about a bit here. Why did you guys do that? Why was that like something you guys felt like you had to invest into, and what was like your what did you hope to get out of it?
Thanks. Yeah, it was a really fun and rewarding process for me and for a lot of us. It's a book called The Blue Pill that a number of people wrote within Yearn, and it's about who we feel we are at Yearn. And if you're not familiar with the story of Yearn, it started in chaos. You know, like Andre Cronje created this incredible software platform, and he didn't want to govern it, so he created the YFI, which we call Wi-Fi token, and he released it to the world. And I think of this as a kind of Big Bang. It was this explosive moment which created this entire new little universe. And it started from one little thing, this 9 days of Wi-Fi emission, and then just community formed. And there was no leader, there was no decision-making system. People like me were just called in at that time because this was cool. And we're amazed that somebody had this integrity and these principles to give something fully away. He could have made billions on it, but he gave it away because he didn't want to do it and he wanted other people to. And that meant a lot to me and to a lot of people. And so we had to figure out from whole cloth how to create our community. And it's always, in my mind, had two pieces, right? There's the yield function. There's these software tools that you can put crypto assets into and earn a return on, earn APY. But then there's the community part. There's the governance. There's the organization. There's how we come together. And from the beginning, for Yearn in particular, that was essential because Yearn runs on strategies. It runs on people, or the yield function runs on people surveying the space, seeing the opportunities, committing them to code, and then offering them for others to use. And in order to do that, you need a system that can bring these people in and reward them, make them feel trusted and safe. So it needed that governance from the beginning. There was nothing that could quite do that, so we had to build it all ourselves, right? And in writing this blue pill, we wanted to create, like, what's the vision for Yearn? You know, what are we doing? What's our roadmap? People would always ask us. It's like, well, there's nobody at the top writing this, you know? There's no C-suite that's gonna, like, hire a marketing firm and create this document for you. So but there was a need for it, so how do we do it? So we just crowdsourced it internally. Like, I started asking a lot of questions, interviewing people, other people started talking to people, people had ideas, it took months, you know, it's always so fucking slow when you do it this way. But we put all these ideas about who we believe we are into this document, and we wrote it to share it with the world so that people would maybe help on our mission and understand us better.
So previously you talked about how the blockchain is kind of this space, and DAOs are this space to preserve such artifacts. So when you guys were exploring the blue pill, how does an artifact like that, if it's correct to categorize that as one, kind of connect to this idea of a DAO and this preservation and propagation of such artifacts?
Well, we've really had to learn in the fire, you know, of how to be a DAO, because we had a lot of money at stake right from the beginning. We had users that were using our products, and we didn't have a traditional centralized structure to fall back on. And we also restrained ourselves from creating that centralized structure. One of the things you find in these formless, inchoate spaces that we're all treading in, this ambiguity, there's a tremendous amount of tension to fall back on things that work. You know, it's like, oh, well, in my last company, we had fucking KPRs, or we had OKRs, and we had this system or whatever, and it's like, let's do all that. It's like, no, don't do that. You know, do something better. And shit, I forgot your question. Where was I going with this?
The question was how artifacts like the blue pill are preserved.
Yeah. So how it's preserved? Well, it's preserved on the blockchain and the community, but the ethos, how the ethos is preserved, I think, is in telling this story and creating these new systems of working together and sharing them with others, making them open source, and building as a community together.
Awesome. And then to tie in a bit more with like the media aspect of this talk, which is how culture is formed, that seems like one of those documents that are really keystone in creating a culture. First, I'd be curious if you agree with the sentiment that even in DAOs, culture comes from vision. And secondly, I'd be curious as to, for an organization like Yearn that was born from the fire, how did you get buy-in from such a vision?
Slowly, and thoughtfully, and carefully. Like, normally in organizations, where does culture come from? It comes generally most easily from the leaders, the people at the top or at the center of the network that are leading by doing, and they are creating the culture that other people resonate with, and it calls them in, and then they start going in that direction. And a lot of the time, you don't even need to elucidate what that vision is, because you have an object, you have a person that is representing it and manifesting it for everyone. But in a group like Yearn, which is leaderless from the start, or I like to say leaderful, because we're really trying to make a system where everybody is a leader and everybody can act autonomously, you don't have that example. So it's a little bit harder to, you do have them. People like Andre have other people that are leaders in the community, but there is no one person that is stamping this out for everyone else to use. And so then, like, I could say, well, here's my vision, and I have done that, and other people can say that, but how do you actually synthesize one for the whole community? It's in dialogue. It's through relationships, and it's through doing process like the blue pill. writing that, sharing that, getting feedback, iterating. It's alive, which is actually much better. A lot of people are scared of the bullshit values that boomer companies make. Let's put them up on our wall, but really we know it's just the bottom line that matters. But for communities like ours, the principles really do matter because it's because we don't have a bottom line of $1, right? Like we have to, what does keep us together? Why are we all doing this? And that can be tacit and not spoken, but it actually can be very nice when you do speak it.
Why do you think it's so, like, in this kind of arc of history, right, oftentimes we idolize certain figures for having these visions, like Napoleon or Jobs or what have you. Why do you think it's important that, or why do you think it might be a benefit that vision doesn't come from a singular charismatic kind of person?
Well, it's an interesting topic. So Foucault wrote about this, and he called it the author function. And said, like, have you read, Heidegger's new book? And be like, oh, no, but it must be great because it's Heidegger, like, and he's some fancy philosopher. And so he used the name of the author as a shortcut to valuing something because it comes from somebody that is valued. And so in communities, you can use this shortcut. You're like, oh, like, if a means part of it, it's got to be really cool, or somebody else, right? But when you don't have that, then it's harder, and you have to like look at the actual stuff that's happening and decide for yourself, is this actually good or not? And that takes more time.
Are there certain processes that you found successful at Yearn to actually co-create a vision? A cynist might find that like a kind of a continual flow of people's opinions may make it hard to kind of form and align on a certain on one thing. What were like the processes that you depended on to kind of co-create that vision and get alignment?
Well, for the vision itself, it was a process of just dialogue, right? Of saying intentionally, hey, we want to have a vision. What do you guys think? And hearing people's feedback, and often, usually at Yearn, everyone's working so hard on software and the vaults and stuff that there's not a lot of extra time for like creating a vision. So it's often crickets, and I'm the one saying like, hey guys, let's do this thing. Hey guys, and so it's like, okay, let's do this. You get some feedback, and then you write something, and you get some feedback, and it's just an iterative dialogue, But we don't have like a hardcore process for that, but we have found, I think your question points to another important piece of DAOs, which is how important processes are, right? And we talk about like the 3 Ps, the purpose, principles, and the process are essential for a DAO to grow. And these can be defined in different ways, but the process is like at Yearn, we are experimenting with the advice process, which is something that comes from teal organizations, which is like everybody can make any decision they want as long as they ask for advice first. You ask for the advice, you hear the advice, and then you make whatever decision you want. And then you have a conflict resolution process that if you don't like some decision someone's made, you can start this process with them, which is an iterative process to resolve that conflict. And you can change, every decision is iterative. You can always change a decision. Because the bias, we really want to have this bias on action. We don't want to spend all of our time debating shit into the ground. It's like the people we work with, I trust. They know what they're doing. They can make decisions on their own. As long as there are processes to support conflict and edge cases that come up, and those processes are pretty critical. And these are the ones that are kind of less famous. We're all familiar with coin voting processes, but you need a lot of other types of decision-making process in any organism. I was Freudian slip, any organization, same thing, to make it function.
Do you want to spend a minute talking about teal organizations and how they connect with the idea of a DAO?
Yes, so there's a teal lover. Who's heard of teal organizations before? So this is a concept created by Frederick Laloux in this book, Reinventing Organizations, and he spent years researching companies around the world that were leading in really new ways, trying to identify the kind of next wave of corporate governance, let's say. And what he found, some similarities were things like self-management. These companies where everybody set their own salary and nobody had a boss, and they would decide what they did. And these are traditional companies, these aren't DAOs, right? This is over the past 30 years, like Morningstar, a tomato paste company in California, which has between 800 and 2,500 employees processing tomato paste, all setting their own salaries without a boss, right? And these have been working extremely well, not just theoretically, like companies all over the world doing this type of work. And so it's incredibly apropos for DAOs because you can think there's at least 2 pieces to DAOs, right? There's the kind of the hardware and the software. The hardware of the DAO is the kind of consensus-making systems or coin voting or whatever else you have, but then the software is like, how are you organizing? How are you operating? Like, what are you reducing to practice? Or you can operate a DAO like a mafia, like a crime group if you want, by fear and intimidation. You can operate it like a nonprofit where every voice is heard, and it's all about talking. Or you can operate it, like a teal organization, where it's all autonomous and people can make every decision for themselves. And you can also use those different kind of worldviews in an LLC or in a crime group. Like they're two independent axes.
Is a teal organization the underlying philosophy behind Yearn? And if so, like, how did you guys kind of arrive on it?
I think we've been identifying what's happening at Yearn and seeing that it has a lot of teal aspects, and then we've been using this research and this thinking as a way to improve how we work together.
So from vision, which Yearn's kind of painted really well, we imagine from vision comes out culture, organizational structure, values, and mission statements, and so on. Those exist in centralized Web 2 companies that don't have like the DAO mentality. But do you think there's certain aspects of each of those points, like culture, organizational structure, that are better fit for like the philosophy of a DAO and are better like adapted to fit that model than others?
Well, I think the first point that's really interesting there is like a lot of people say like, "Wait, how are DAOs different than LLCs or something?" Or like okay, you have coin voters, but you have shareholder votes, and you have a multi-sig, and you have a board. Like it's the same thing, It's like, well, architecturally, the structures of human coordination have been similar and evolving for decades. People work in small groups and in large groups, and like those different features are not unique to any one format of operations. That's not the interesting piece, right? The interesting piece is a lot of the things like what Kevin was just talking about, like that they're permissionless and they're open and that they're cross-jurisdiction and that they're equal access and equal opportunity and all these things. And it's all immutable and stored on a ledger and visible for everybody. That's what really changes everything. And you were saying, oh yeah, for culture. So in the same way that you might look and say, oh, it's the same thing as like a board or whatever. You say, oh, look, all these, like Google has a fucking culture and like they're garbage and it's like, why are you gonna bring that boomer stuff to DAOs, man? And it's like, well, we have cultures too. Like we can find our own way to do culture, right? In a way that is native to our community and to our beliefs and to our values. And that's important also. I think there's a bit of an idea that in a DAO, and that you see this happening a lot, it's like you shouldn't do any of that. And it's just like, okay, just throw it to the DAO. Just like launch the discourse, launch the Snapchat, and now you guys are in charge, go, And it doesn't work so great, really. You can see a lot of examples of that not always work. I mean, it's fun, and you can learn a lot, but you can also do some work to help, in self-sovereign, native crypto ways to create the leadership structures that allow for natural, fluid leadership, not hierarchical, rigid leadership. I mean, natural hierarchies are great, but rigid ones where like I'm always the boss is never good. And, you can create structures to support that, and that's an ongoing process at Yearn and Coordinape and a lot of other groups I'm in.
You kind of already explored this question a little bit, but in like Web 2, we see a lot of cultural statements focused on the product. Like Facebook's like, move fast and break things. Amazon wants to be the most customer-centric company in the world. Do you view these statements as taking on a new flavor and perhaps a new direction when it kind of comes to DAOs or teal organizations or the like?
Yeah, I mean, a mafia boss can say, yeah, I'm really in this for you. I'm really trying to help you out here, with this deal, And you'd be like, okay. Or like somebody in with a different worldview can say that and be like, oh, yes, I believe you are. So, in the way that one of the FANG companies or whatever has these visions for not being evil or whatever, it's like, basically the structure, the structure that those companies operate in and the worldview, like the worldviews that emerge from those specific structures that ride on top of military-backed governments, with abstruse legal codes, and asymmetric information sharing that are locked behind corporate veils, and crafted by an entrenched power group over decades and decades to favor certain people over others. Like, just structurally, those statements can't be true. They can't be valid. Right? It's all gaslighting by design. But that doesn't mean that, that when people say statements like that, it's always untrue. Like, we have to create better, and that's what we're all doing here, is creating structures that can allow for people to have real goals like that, real visions, like really trying to solve these challenges.
One of the challenges that we face at the Index Coop is really managing some of these tensions that exist with this, like what we think is like this DAO philosophy and what we think we need to be an effective organization. tensions such as like being in an open org and providing all contributors a home with like not overloading our leaders and like not getting bogged down in processes. How do you kind of approach such tensions? Do you view them as problems to be solved, tensions to be managed, a figment of like being early in the DAO tooling space?
Tensions are a gift. Tension's always a gift, right? Because we're trying to do things and build things, and what are we trying to build them for? And you can see a lot of speculative creation, a lot of speculative building. Like, there might be this problem in the future, and I'm going to build this big, brittle system to handle it. That's not a great way to design, really. That's a kind of design that comes from one's own fears. But when you design based on actual living tension, to solve that present tension in a system, then you can create structures that are organic. That's how nature designs, right? These are structures that will grow and can flex and breathe and change instead of be brittle. So we really try and practice tension-driven design. Try and solve what's right in front of you instead of what you think might emerge. There's always a balance there. I mean, you have to also be looking ahead, but those actual living tensions in any system are the doorway, right? They're the gateway to freedom and to creation.
If you were to take the opposite perspective, do you think there's like an advantage to having this like forward-looking, perhaps brittle design?
Well, I think it depends on how you hold it, right? So it's great to look ahead and say, oh, what might things be like? And like strategically, let's think about what our roadmap is, and let's think about what we might need to make, and maybe we can even start playing with it. But then if you hold it kind of lightly like that, and you open it up, but then if you're focusing all your effort on something that's a year out that may or may not happen, instead of the stuff that's right in front of you, maybe look at why.
To get really tactical, as like a DAO that produces software, which the Index Co-op does as well, do you guys adopt like agile processes of like Web2 organizations? Are you guys also viewing that as an opportunity to approach from a blank state?
We tried a lot of different things, and we're really emergent and organic in how we work. But just over the past few months, a lot of the engineering teams have been trying new processes and using task tracking and doing sprints and spikes to do research and experimenting. There's just a tremendous amount of learning by doing at Yearn, and experimentation, and people bringing in different wisdom from different places that they've been and trying those things and seeing what works. But really, everyone at Yearn gets to decide for themselves how they work. We try these things. If they work, more people start liking them, they share them, and then new processes develop.
So experimentation can be frustrating, right? Especially when it doesn't work, and you feel like your colleagues might be wasting their time or whatever. What were the preconditions necessary to have adopted such a, I guess, tolerant framework to stuff like experimentation instead of falling back on sprint planning and stuff like that?
That's a good question. In the early days of Yearn, I think it was just, a lot of that ethos came from Andre, and came from the early people that were around back then, and of just like doing, like we're doers. We like to make things, and we don't really want bureaucracy, and we're willing to take risks and for things to fail, and that's really formed how we worked.
Something that's kind of popped up at the Index Co-op is like as we scale and as our organization grows, we always have a new guard of people that want to make sure that they're heard and their opinions are respected. And there's kind of this tension a little bit between like this old guard and new guard of contributors. I'd be curious if like you think this is something Yearn felt, or if you think this is an inherent aspect of an open organization. And how do you approach something like that?
Oh yeah, conflict is part of the game. I mean, there's always going to be conflict, people with different ideas, people stepping on each other's toes, and one person didn't get enough information on this thing, and why not, and wasn't transparent, it was supposed to be, and you're hiding something, I know it, That's just human beings,
Got it. Are there certain processes that you think you found valuable that managed conflict?
Well, the teal organization kind of conflict resolution process is something we've been experimenting with, and it's a very good one. And just to break it down really simply, is coming from this ethos of real sovereignty, real autonomy, self-management. Each person decides for themselves. So what happens when somebody's being an asshole, or what happens when somebody's underperforming or making a really bad decision over and over again? Well, one way is you, instead of having there be some committee that's in charge of making sure everyone stays in line, it's like, no, we're all human beings here. We can all stand up for ourselves. If I am in conflict with something you are doing, I talk to you about it. And the first step of the conflict resolution process is just to have that conversation and say, hey, dude, like, I don't know why you're doing this. This is causing all these problems. Maybe you can work it out together. And if you can't work it out in that one call, then the next step is you do another call and you bring in a third party just to help listen. That person isn't there to decide for you. It's just there to listen. And then you have the same conversation, and maybe you get to resolution this time. And if not, then you can keep escalating it, right? It's a lot more talking than a lot of autistic people in DeFi like, but it does work.
That's fascinating. Do you want to talk a little bit about like DAO tooling and like why you think it's important and like how you see DAOs being able to scale through technology?
Yeah, that's like my favorite topic. I would like to talk about that. Yes. So like most people think about DAOs and you're like, okay, yeah, we all get a token and we put that in the machine and we vote and then the proposal goes and that's decision making. It's like that is one way to make a decision. A Gnosis safe is another way to make a decision. But if you look at any organization, any sophisticated group of people, there are so many different types of decisions that need to be made. And all of those decisions are not a good fit for coin voting. Coin voting is a great tool, right? But it's not the only way to make decisions within a DAO, and we don't have tooling for all of the other things that need to happen. So at Yearn, we've been developing a lot of this, and at Coordinape, we've been developing a lot of this. And if you take that multivariate dimensional space of decision-making in a group of flawed human beings, there's decisions that need to be made fast and slow, and ones that have high impact, and ones that need buy-in from a lot of different people, and ones that don't matter. So we're slicing this space up and seeing that there's on-chain decisions, there are off-chain decisions, there are gated decisions that require some type of consensus process, there are ungated decisions that anybody should be able to make. Then here's how you deal with if the decision goes wrong, blah, 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 all these different processes. But we don't have a lot of the tooling to support this. You know, there's so much more tooling needed. So one of the ways we've been working on that is through Governance 2, which Gabe Shapiro and I wrote at Yearn, which we also call constrained delegation, which is a way to, instead of delegate voting power, which you see a lot of like, on-chain voting systems allow you to do, you can delegate decision-making power. You can say, okay, the decisions about fees for this vault are delegated to this group of people with a visible signership, and the signers of that group can be changed through this process, and it's transparent what they're doing, and if they're doing a good job holding this power, great, and if not, the Wi-Fi holders can vote to move that power to somewhere else. Right now, that's all kind of on the social layer, but we're starting, it's all happening in Telegram groups, because there's not a good tooling to handle it, but people like, Gnosis and their Zodiac platform and Colony and Orca and all these different people are working on cool ways to implement this type of tooling. And that's one thing. One of my favorite ways to slice a DAO's decision-making matrix up is through compensation-related decisions and non-compensation-related decisions. Because spending money is one of the biggest things that an organization does. But then there's a lot of other decisions that are not necessarily around spending money, like policies, practices, whatever. So a lot of the stuff I'm talking about works well for both, but compensation-related decisions need specialized tooling as well. And that's where Coordinape kind of came from, which is a way to do really decentralized resource sharing. So you have all you need is a budget stream, a reason to spend that money, and a group of people. And if you put those three things together, then Coordinape handles all the rest. Nobody has to make the decision for who gets what. The whole group does that in a decentralized way. And the dream for that is to allow, basically, you can take any idea, any new idea, and slap a Coordinape gift circle on it, and that idea can grow, right? If the idea is making money, the money comes in, new people come into this circle. The circle can also grow in a decentralized way through vouching any 3 people or 2 people or 7 people, whatever you want, agree that a new person should be part of this circle, and then they are. And they can start receiving resources for whatever compensation they do. And this is a world where you don't have to worry about, oh, I'm committed, I'm married to this company, or like, I'm just doing this, or like, here's my time clock, or like, here's my OKRs. You are just creating whatever value that you believe is important for this group. And if it's good, the other people you're working with will recognize that, and they will reward you through this gift circle, and you'll start making money. And you don't have to say, that's all you have to do. You don't have to hire anybody, really. You can work at multiple different DAOs at the same time, and money just starts to flow where the value is created. It's a very protocol-centric way of distributing resources.
Yeah, a lot of fascinating questions coming out of that. The one I'd like to explore at the meta level is, to implement stuff like Coordinape or decision making or conflict resolution frameworks, it sounds like you need an element of trust, empathy, and safety between the contributors in a DAO, which is hard to do, especially behind like anonymous profiles or just the internet. How do you kind of establish? Do you think DAO tooling has a place in establishing that, or how do you kind of approach that in general?
Yeah, so this is another favorite topic. I think trust is one of the most misunderstood things in crypto. So we often talk about trustlessness, and it's incredibly important. But this space works in layers, right? So at the bottom layer, we need this incredibly robust adversarial environment of the blockchain, to allow for trustless, shared ledger utility, right? So that you don't have to worry that your coin is going to get taken by somebody else, because the rules are super clear and it's very, very firm. This is like the physics, this is like the molecular interaction of this collective space, and that you don't want trust there. You do not want trust there. There's sharks there. It's a dark forest. But on top of that, it's okay to have trust, and actually there always is trust. No matter how you do a payment, let's say I'm hiring somebody to do a job. I can either pay them before the job or I can pay them after the job. If I pay them before they do the job, then I'm trusting them to do it well. If they're paying them after the job, then they're trusting me. It's like, okay, well, you can put a system on top of that, an escalation game or something like that if there's a problem, and then you're trusting that game to some extent too. And you can get rid of a lot of that trust, but at the end of the day, there's always going to be trust, and especially just in a team. Like, think about the two people you work most closely with, right? Do you want there to be trust in that group or not? It's actually, you do want trust, right? You do want trust there. Because those are the types of open, bonded relationships that makes being a human being nice, actually. You want to trust and rely on people. And we need to build the tooling that supports those types of creative, trusted relationships as well as the adversarial relationships. Not all of life is adversarial, right? There's a lot of collaborative life, too.
So do you have a perspective on how we can kind of establish that sense of trust and safety when we're all on the internet and interacting virtually?
Well, isn't it amazing, though, how much trust there really is? Because there's so much more trust that I've seen in people that are building stuff on Ethereum or on blockchain than in previous legal environments that I've been in. I used to have a number of normal companies, and there's a lot less trust there. There's a lot more contracting, there's a lot more paper. But in crypto, there's a lot of just, like, I don't even know you, you're a fucking cartoon character, but you're ready to send me a shitload of USDC on a handshake, Like, that's pretty normal. And I think that's because it's just like in the human developmental cycle, really, right? When we're kids, we have to create the developmental pathways that allow us to feel safe in our own bodies. And then I have a 10-month-old, so these are things I think about. And then as you grow, you grow more and more this developmental pathway. People like Piaget and John Gebser and many other people have studied. And in the collective space, it's the same. Like, you have to have this very, very solid first level of value storage on the blockchain. And once you have, and the best one we've ever made in the history of this earth, right, is the blockchain. And it's so, so good, it's so strong, that it allows for really beautiful, trusted growth above it. It allows for us to move in these new ways on top of it.
Awesome. I think I'm getting the signal that our time is wrapping up. Do we have time for one more question, or do you have any final thoughts, Track, as to DAOs, whatever we talked about, that you'd like to impart to the audience?
I mean, I couldn't be more excited to be working on this than anything else ever. And to be here with all these people, all you guys working on it too, it's really amazing. I guess my thought is just like that this is amazing stuff. Like, let's be grateful, that we get to be here working on this at the forefront of this emerging industry with all these amazing people, and like just take a moment to be grateful for this whole event and everyone that were here. So thank you.
Hell of a way to close.
Thanks.